All right. So what's next for Pitcher List is the name of this one, and it doesn't quite fit fully, but that's all right. We'll get that figured out. This is where we're going to be telling you guys, guess what? What's next for Pitcher List in 2025? So this is the stuff that we're going to be talking about right now. The PL Pro dashboard, the live draft assistant, Process Plus, all the extra things with that PL stuff, PLV stuff, live pitch feed. And yes, all of this you can be looking forward to this year. So if you're unaware of all the things that we have here at Pitcher List, what are you doing with yourself? Okay, guys? Like this, these PL Pro additions with the live pitch feed is insane. The Process Plus, rolling charts, all that kind of stuff. But this is the quick look at what to expect with PL 11 and in this year. Okay. So let's talk about the PL Pro dashboard. This is what we are making right now. This is dummy data. This is just kind of ignore the actual text at the moment. But this is a project we've been working on for over a year. And what we are making is a dashboard for you to be able to import your fantasy team and get a series of widgets as well as our projections telling you what to do. It is incredible. We want to do things like being able to flag when a player hits a certain WOBA over 30 days or a certain Process Plus. It is also where we're going to be. It's going to be the home of all of the PLV apps inside of this. So it's quick access to it. And as we continue to develop, we're going to be adding all the features of Pitcher List really inside of this so that as a PL Pro member, you have the articles that you want. You have the news that you want for player news. We are working with RotoWire to have RotoWire news feed inside of it. We also have our own news feed that we're going to talk about. Actually, wasn't even going to mention, but we are making our own thing called the feed as well, which is the Pitcher List curated baseball information. We want to work towards with this dashboard, we're going to have things that are alerts with StatCast data involved in it. We have so many ideas and things we want to accomplish inside of this dashboard that's tailored to you. You're having these player pages and team pages that are all the charts and data that we want, including, of course, the normal ones that we have. We are stoked for this. We love the design of it. We love the look of it and the feel of it. And it's really your support, guys, by getting PL Pro that is helping us fund this project so that you guys can have the thing that you want. So this will be a beta that we are launching this season in April. And we'll be launching the real 1.0 with all the additions and everything will be for 2026. However, it will be a process with this beta that we are adding it. Think of it like an early access for like your favorite video game or something like that. We'll have the fantasy manager with your matchup and be able to get your suggestions with our projections that Kyle has. We're going to talk about in a moment, just the additions to that. But we are really, this has been something we worked really hard on. The team has been doing incredible work with it, and I can't wait. We also have an update. We have a live draft assistant, which is a Google Sheet right now. Michael Rathel helped put that together. Kyle Bland has maintained it and really improved it this year with our V3 projections and just making that a really great Google Sheet that I'm using for my drafts. However, we realized that we want to make it a web app as well. So this is the live draft assistant web app that we're going to be launching by the end of February. And this is, again, just dummy data, just to kind of give you an idea of like, this is what a draft board looks like. These are all the different rosters, but it has full customization of settings for points leagues, for auction leagues. You're able to see your team. You're able to see our projections with it. You're able to see round value inside of your cheat sheet as well, and view draft and all the kind of stuff that you want to see. Live standings as you draft are automatically done. Just having this as a web app that is super easy just to input picks as they happen. It's a really amazing one. It's just so much nicer and easier to use than the Google Sheet one. So we're so excited to have that by the end of February before draft season in March. So I can't emphasize enough, guys, getting PL Pro is the best way to help us get these things out the door. So that's what we're doing on the feature side, the big projects. We have our mobile app that is still in development. We're thinking about getting that out this year. However, we are planning to make that more of a 2026 project, simply because we feel that getting these fantasy tools in your hand is more important than having a generalized all-encompassing app. Also, one that is already integrated with it. So if you have that mobile app and then we have this thing separate and it doesn't quite fit, it didn't feel like a seamless experience for everybody. And we wanted to make sure that we do things in this order for everybody. So let's talk about Process Plus. And Kyle, I screwed up. I didn't give you a full presentation on Process Plus. That's on me.
Oh, you're good. Luckily, yeah. I've prepped enough of it for this, and I've been doing a lot of work prepping articles and some research papers for it that I can talk about it whenever, wherever, and I got charts. So let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Here we go. Process Plus, take it away.
Yeah, so the Process Plus, the idea is that our PLV pitch model affords us the ability to measure hitter performance while also adjusting for the quality of the pitches that a hitter faces. So we have an estimate of, this pitch is estimated to do, be a double this amount of time, a swinging strike this amount of time, a ball this amount of time. Well, we can use those as inputs to see how well a batter performs given that. Now, we had done this last year. We had a couple different hitter stats that I found very useful. We had rolling charts. It was great. But the problem was they were computed with scales for each individual stat. So decision value was on a run scale, value. Contact ability used contact percent over expected. So he added 3% of contact to the pitches he faced, which makes sense intuitively. People understand contact rate, things like that. And then power used basically X ISO over expected. So the pitch is expected to allow this many extra bases, but based on how the hitter hit that ball, we project that he'll get this many extra bases, and that's more or less, and that was functionally their power metric. Now, those make sense when you're looking at them individually. They kind of line up with maybe, at least with my idea of, well, what are these things trying to say? But it made comparing the stats impossible. That you can't be like, well, how good are his decisions versus his contact? How much does his power trade off for the contact value that he added? So here, go ahead and hit that next slide.
Absolutely.
So to make them easy to be able to compare those things, we need a single scale. The most logical one is runs. That's kind of the currency of baseball: runs scored, runs prevented, and hitters are trying to score runs. And now with the current state of baseball analytics, that runs is a more commonly accepted hitting scale. You see WRC plus referenced all the time. Decision value was already there, but now we needed contact ability and power, and we did that by transforming them to a run scale based on their initial expectations and their outcomes. So basically for contact, they swung at this pitch. Here's what's expected to happen, and here's the value of that. And then, did they make contact? If so, we give them the value of the expected making contact. So generic, people who make contact here get this value. And so that's the value that they add. We don't take into account how hard they hit the ball, who the hitter is, anything like that. Just did they make contact or not, and what's the average value? And then for power, kind of the same thing. What was the expected bases on the pitch, and what did they actually apply using basically an xWOBA? And all of those things now allow us to get contact and power also on a run scale that is separate and distinct from decision value. So it allows each of them to be additive, that there's no double counting in any one thing, that we have, here's the value of their decisions. Given that decision, here's the value of whether they made contact or not. Given making contact on that pitch, here's the value of the power that they added or not. Now, that's all well and good and helpful. One interesting aside that I noticed from looking at this is making contact isn't always the best outcome for a swing. So you think about it, generally the idea is he makes good contact even out of zone. It's that's a plus. He's got good bat to ball. But the problem is if there are fewer than 2 strikes, if you miss that low and away slider, that's actually better because all it costs you is a strike, but you stay in that plate appearance, versus if you make contact, it's likely going to be very weak contact, and it's likely going to be an out. So what you're essentially doing is you're taking one strike and turning that into an out rather than into a second strike. So this kind of gives a little bit of nuance and properly helps us evaluate players. Like the one that always comes to mind is Javier Baez, who has extremely good bat to ball, but it isn't actually as useful for him. That skill is actually detrimental and is holding him back. So that's kind of a nice little aside, a nice little fun anecdote for that. Okay, next slide. Great. So now we have the process complete. So we have decisions, bat to ball quality, and batted ball quality. So basically the big three of what hitters do at the plate, and we can combine them into a single holistic pitch quality adjusted hitting value, and we call that process. So these are process runs. And then now that we have these 4 PLV hitter stats, decisions, contact, power, process, we converted them to a plus scale, which is pretty generally understood. For our purposes, 100 is league average, and a season-long standard deviation is 15. Values above 100 are better for the hitter. They added more runs. All right, next. Sweet. So there are a number of statistical benefits to this, such as they're very sticky. It's very easy to predict kind of from season to season. They describe themselves well, which is always nice. It's always useful for the idea of, okay, well, like, great, he did this season, but how important is that? Or what does that tell us about who he is? Like, is that just describing he got lucky, he did this, he did that? But no, these are generally, they follow a hitter from season to season. One of the things, because these are pitch based and not outcome based, they also will follow a hitter from park to park. We'll get to that in another slide, but basically every season, so from one season to the next, you can assume that a hitter is generally going to be within about 10 points of what they did last year. So, his decision value is a 120 plus. Well, next year he's probably going to be about 110 to 130, somewhere in the mix there. And so that's really helpful. They do get a little noisier because things like decisions, that happens every pitch. Did you decide to swing or not? Contact is every swing. So like, okay, given that they swung, did they make contact or not? And power is every batted ball. So on every ball they put in play, what was the expected value of that batted ball over the pitch? And so the sample size on those gets smaller and smaller, and so they get a little bit noisier season to season. And then since process is kind of shoving all 3 of those stats together and making it, it's also a little bit noisier because different, like, power has it adds more value than something like decision or contact, but because it happens less frequently, it can be a little bit noisier when you're looking at it on the same scale as contact or decisions. All right, next slide. Sweet. Could I get that next slide, Nick? Awesome. And so one of the things that came out of this that was really eye-opening and awesome to see was that Process Plus is actually more predictive of real life stats. Sorry, previous slide. And so what that means is basically WRC is already pretty solid at predicting itself next season. But we found that Process Plus was actually slightly better at predicting WRC Plus, which was not the goal of this. This was more to tell a story of how a hitter performed against, like, the difficulty of pitches. But it's great to see. It makes it useful. I know I've folded a lot of these stats into our POV projections that we've had out for this upcoming season. And it's also really nice because this can be applicable to this upcoming season with park changes. That I know WRC Plus accounts for park, but Process Plus doesn't even need park. If you have those measurements, you know from the first pitch what their process value was. And so we don't need to wait to get an idea of, okay, well, what's, the Sacramento A's or the Las Vegas A's or wherever they end up playing, next season and following seasons, that we don't need to know what the park factors are to already have an idea of how well that hitter is performing given the context he's in. And same thing for, like, Tampa Bay. They're going to be playing in a different stadium. Well, okay, we have an idea of here's how their hitters did. We have a good idea of, okay, well, their WRC Plus will probably pretty close to this next year based on what their Process Plus was in the past year. Cool. Next slide. And so I'm seeing in chat, so we're accounting for pitch quality and the contact ability metric. Yeah, so we're accounting for pitch quality across all 4 of these. So, how good was it to swing at or not as decision value? How easy is it, and how valuable is the contact made on that pitch, given that pitch's expectations is contact value? And then how many extra bases are you adding to the expectation from that pitch? So the idea that I like to use is like, okay, you get thrown a grooved fastball right down the middle. Well, that's, you expect that to get hit for damage, like a double or something like that. And so if you hit a double, you don't actually get as much credit. Like, you did what you're supposed to do, basically. But if you hit a homer, you get extra credit. Or if you only hit a single, or you hit a batted ball that's likely to be a single, then you get dinged for that, because actually, well, you left a little bit on the table. Like, that was a meatball that you should be crushing. So all of these stats I'm talking about are pitch quality adjusted. And great. So those are the statistical benefits. But one of the fun things that's come from this is the narrative benefits. The big one last year, my favorite example, is Adley Rutschman. So at the end of June, he got hit on the wrist by a foul tip. And you can see from the chart on the right there that, well, his contact ability stays the same. It fluctuates a little bit. His decisions also stay the same, also fluctuate a little bit. But what ends up happening is from late June on, his power, so his ability to add extra bases to the pitches that he makes contact with, just plummets. And so that helps me explain, like, okay, like when I'm looking at Adley Rutschman, when I'm trying to diagnose, like, what happened, do I think that this is who he is as a player now? Like, well, now we have an explanation for, well, okay, well, this thing happened here. That lines up perfectly with him just not being able to basically get as much power into that bat at that exact same time. This allows me to feel maybe a little bit more comfortable going into 2025 with Adley Rutschman, assuming his wrist is healed. That, like, okay, this seems like it was just, it only happened at the injury. It only looked like it sapped his power. This is something that, like, okay, I can buy in and feel a little bit more confident. Another example, another narrative that I've been trying to use for this is how a hitter gets to their end results. So one of my personal favorites is Juan Soto. He makes just God tier decisions, and he actually doesn't add a ton of value with contact, but that combination, and he hits the ball really, really hard. But that combination allows him to be a 300 hitter. But that's a much different structure, a much different shape of his performance than someone like a Luis Arias, who kind of swings at everything, is like the definition of a slap hitter, but just has a God tier ability to put bat to ball. And like, both of those guys can be 300 hitters, but how they get to being a 300 hitter is so vastly different. And I think this is a way for us to kind of help shine a light on what they do well and how that affects their actual results. Sweet. Can I get that next slide? So one of the things that we're really excited for, we've been working on this like all last year, is PLV based stuff and location models. So I know people have been asking for this a while. Sweet. Next slide. So jumping right into it, our PLV stuff model. Everyone has a stuff model. They're all beautiful. They're all everyone's individual children. We love them all equally. What makes them different is how you get to that stuff value. And there are a lot of philosophical differences, what goes into it, what gets used, what gets output. One of the things that I've noticed that I really liked and that makes ours a little bit different from the other ones I've seen is that it handles count in a unique way, and it produces outputs in a different way than I think I've seen, at least publicly presented. Next slide. So the main one is count. Basically, the idea being it's easier to get swinging strikes in some counts versus others. So one of the things I noticed is that hitters tend to swinging strikes actually go up as the count gets deeper. And so one of the things that means is that a pitch's ability to get whiffs is also dependent on the count it's thrown in. But you want to, like, if you just want an idea, a holistic idea of how good is this pitch at getting whiffs, you need to adjust for that count. And so one of the things that we are going to be implementing is using a weighted average of counts based on that pitch's stuff, its shape, its movement, that we are basically estimating a distribution of counts that pitches like this were thrown in. And so that will give us a much more apples to apples comparison of how the league tends to use pitches like that. So it doesn't credit or discredit a pitcher for atypical count usage based on, well, it gets strikes or it doesn't get strikes. A big one is Paul Skeens. He kind of uses his pitches in a slightly atypical way. He uses his fastball a lot, sometimes in 2-strike counts. He uses his off speed and his breaking pitches earlier. And so one of the things that chart to the right says is adjusting for the count, the MLB for fastballs, for your 4-seam fastballs, MLB pitches to about an 11% swinging strike rate. But Paul Skeens throws at an 18% swinging strike rate based on the count he throws it in. So he's a full 7 percentage points better than MLB average just with his fastball. And so that's going to be reflected that his stuff numbers are going to kind of get brought up a little bit because he's getting whiffs in more challenging counts to get whiffs in. Sweet. Next slide. So now we're on to outputs. So the outputs are very similar to PLV. It's outcome based rather than run value based. And then we apply run values back to those outcomes. So what that basically means is what our stuff model is outputting is, okay, here's the likelihood, estimated chance of it being a whiff, of it being a foul, and then of the various types of batted balls that end up, batted ball quality. And so what that allows us to do is kind of dig in, get our hands dirty, and see why is the pitches stuff good? Is there stuff? Is it just wicked? Like batters can't get on top of it, so they're just striking out all the time. So that was something like a Trevor McGill from 2023 that he was earning strikes left and right, but his batted ball quality was pretty poor because if they could get into it, they could actually really put some damage on it. Or is it something like, oh, it's strictly batted ball suppression? So Rich Hill from 2022 was the prime example in the sample that I was looking at that, well, he's not blowing it by anybody, but man, they could just not get their barrel on it for whatever reason. It's weak grounders, it's pop-ups, whatever. That's stuff that the way that pitches bend and dip and dive or rise are consistent year to year and affect the batted ball outcomes. And then you have your Garrett Coles, from a couple years ago, or this would be like your DeGroms. That these are the guys that they're overwhelming, that they miss bats, and when people get their bat onto it, they can't do anything with it. And it's a very that's your kind of ideal outcome. That's what you want. That you don't want the hitter to do anything with it. And so that's one of the things that I'm excited for with this is, it can highlight why a guy like a Clay Holmes is he's got crazy stuff because he just gets tons and tons of ground balls, and that has value. Those get outs just as much as getting a whiff on a 2-strike pitch does. And so I think this kind of helps give an idea of how players get to their stuff and how beneficial those outcomes are. Sweet. Next slide. So we found that it's well calibrated. Basically, what the chart on the left says is when we're predicting individual outcomes, they happen in general about as often as we expect them to. There's going to be variance. There's going to be okay, this had a 20% swinging strike rate. Oh, but the guy swung and missed. So it's 100%, or he did a 0%. But in the aggregate, it looks really good. It lines up, consistently. And then we also grouping it just at the whole pitch type level, it also lines up pretty well for this pitch type. So for a guy's slider, for his sinker, for his splitter, we predicted that the whiff rate will be this. And what we actually observed happening was this. And, there's going to be margin for error for this stuff. I mean, especially because this has no idea where the pitch was, if it's a foot off the plate or if it's right down the pipe, it has no idea. So seeing something like that just based on movement and shape and velo characteristics is really exciting and is positive for just my confidence in this metric. All right, next slide. Sweet. So this is now our results. So in addition to being well calibrated, which is my goal for things like this, of if we're projecting outcomes, I want those outcomes to line up. But one of the things that was positive is, so PLV stuff plus, so that's the total run value of all of those outcomes, is I want that to line up with actual run value. So a pitch level, how many runs are allowed per pitch. And basically what I found is PLV Stuff Plus was more predictive of next year's per pitch run value than run value is itself. So even without location information, it's sticky. It has an idea of, okay, well, we expect their run value. We have a better idea of what their per pitch run value will be than their actual results. And that tracks with previously published research on metrics like your pitching plus or your location plus. The value of locations tend to be a little bit noisier, a little bit more variable. And Stuff Plus tends to kind of cut through that and get to the core of like, this is who this pitcher is. Of course, you'll have your guy like your George Kirby's, your command artists that will be consistent year to year, but at a league level, it's good to know that, okay, well, we're getting some insights into who these players are in a way that is predictive of their success in the future. Next slide, please. And then I'm only going to touch on the location model for a little bit. Basically, location models all kind of converge. They all use a lot of the same variables, pitch locations and count, because where you throw a pitch is so dependent on, and how good that location is so dependent on count. If you have something like 3 strikes, you're going to be incentivized to three balls. You're going to be incentivized to get more in the zone. So that like positive location value is going to shrink towards the center of the zone. Or if you have 2 strikes and like only 1 ball or no balls, that like actually you're incentivized to get further away from the center of the zone, because there's no reason for you to throw a strike, that you're better off taking a risk that they whiff at something or that they make contact at something on the plate. But yeah, and it generally follows kind of understood baseball practice. Dotting corners is good. We'll see, there's a lot of automated ball strikes that's going to be coming in. I'm curious if this is actually, I think, very interesting, because it allows us, like, we already have an idea of the likelihood of pitches being strikes or balls, regardless of who the ump is, based on what the zone is. And so this might actually be kind of helpful in bridging the gap between how the strike zone has been called and the automated ball strike system. But yeah, dotting corners is good. Fastballs up are generally good. That's where they get their whiffs. That's where they get their pop-ups. And then breaking and off speed down and to whichever side that their break is are also generally good. So you want your sweepers, your sliders to be going you want them located down and probably to your glove side, breaking, away from your pitching arm, or for your off speed, you want those to be breaking even further towards, your pitching arm. And low, generally good, because that helps play off the fastball. But again, this doesn't know anything about their shapes. This doesn't know anything about their velocity. This just knows what broad pitch type they are. So fastball, off speed, breaking ball, and then the location and the count. And that's what we're basing all of this off of. All right, next slide, please. So one of the things that we're really excited for this season is we're going to be doing a live pitch feed. All right, next slide. So this is going to be an app more than a stat or a number, but it's going to incorporate a lot of our stats. Essentially, we're going to have an app that is a live feed of pitches that day with models for PLV, stuff, and location. They're going to be like diet models of those things, because the numbers won't be finalized. We won't have updated them into our database. But they're going to be very similar to what the final models are. And so it's going to be things like you can look pitch by pitch and see, okay, well, what was the PLV for that? What was the stuff on that single pitch? How good was that location? And see how it relates to that outcome. So you can see something of like, on August 26th, the first pitch of the game, Wheeler threw a fastball to Alex Bregman. It was a really good pitch, had a PLV of 6, and sure enough, that resulted in an out in play. Awesome. Or something like you can break down, well, let's go and take a look at, okay, how was Cole Reagan's start on August 14th? Oh, great. He had the curveball working, slider working, fastball, changeup also looking pretty solid. That was just another pew Ray Guns outing. It's money. All right, next slide, please. in addition to that, this is going to include all minor league games that at parks with StatCast. So all AAA parks have StatCast provided, so we'll get the live feed of their metrics from that and generate our stuff, PLV, location, all of that info. But in addition, and maybe the fun one is you get A ball. Like in some A ball parks, we get StatCast data. And so I don't know that everyone knows that or what, but it's kind of cool to see these guys. And these are all going to be major league level models. So it's not going to be like, oh, how does this play in A ball or in AAA? No. These are the results based on major league hitters, like trained on major league hitters. So you get a really good idea of, oh, okay, well, like, Andrew Landry's fastball slider combination, like that looks like that'll play. The stuff at the very least, the movement, the shape, the velo, that's a fastball that looks like that it can play in the major league level. Like right now, maybe the location's super spotty. Maybe, it's only a 60 pitch, 55 pitch sample size. So you got to stretch them out, but it's going to be a cool idea, a cool way to identify some of these younger players that have really interesting traits. What pitches pop? How are we? You get a lot of, all of the scouts, all of the prospecting people, they're great at what they do, eye testing, giving us those grades. But this gives us a more data-backed understanding and approach to seeing, okay, well, how do these pitches play? How do they perform? And how does that directly relate to major league level? All right, next slide, please. So we're going to be talking about player cards. So that's something that is near and dear to my heart. That's kind of how I started here in the public space. Next slide, please. It's very fun. Something I'm very proud of is allowing people to get a lot of information in a visual medium that is intuitive and is beneficial to their understanding either of a particular player or of the game of baseball in general. So, everyone loves player cards or loves to critique them. It feels like everyone has player cards, which is great. I'm very much a proponent of the more the merrier. Everyone kind of brings their own special sauce to doing stuff like this. We have a variety of cards on the site for our PL Pro members, so in our subscription, in our apps. But one of the things that we really wanted to push going into this next year is having more holistic kind of all-in-one references at the season level. So how is this pitcher performing in the aggregate, and the things that like we care about when doing analysis, not just, okay, well, how are his pitches moving? Oh, okay, well, what's the shape of his PLV? Like, no, how does that affect, how's that been tracking over time? How does that influence things like, as his location, tracking with his stuff? Is it, how deep are they going into games? All that kind of stuff. Or we can also do at a glance reviews of individual games. So you can see like, yeah, like he could really spin a slider, but he just couldn't locate it that game. So, maybe that's atypical of the rest of his season. So you're not too worried about it. Or you see, it's always the big red flag when a guy loses a ton of velo, as you start to be like, oh, shoot, like that stuff's really playing down. We need to be on the lookout for it. Like if that continues in the next game, that's a real red flag. We don't want it. And so we want to provide those. So it'll be season long and per game player cards that tell our interpretation of kind of who this pitcher or who this hitter is and how they're performing. And these will be available and filled with our PLV suite of stats, their actual performance. And what's most important to me is the distribution. So, it's one thing to say like, oh, this guy's strikeout rate is this, but how does that relate to the rest of the league? Is that elite? Is that very good? Is that average? That there's a variety of different things. And that's what is most interesting to me, is seeing how it relates to the league level, not necessarily just, well, what's the number, number go up, that kind of thing. Next slide, please. So this is just a very scattershot idea of the things that I'm taking into account. It includes some of my former player cards.
Oh, hold on a second. Hold on.
Yeah.
I just want to mention, this is my favorite slide of this entire thing. Oh my gosh, these stick figures. That Kyle has made. I'm sorry, we can't do that. But this is really what my life has become, and which is the best life, guys. Kyle Bland randomly will send me things at night and be like, hey, look at this little thing I made, and it's incredible. So we're really, really excited about these player cards, which we think are going to be showcasing specifically stats that are actually actionable, right? There are a lot of times we see player cards that are a lot of an array, just a vomit of stats that are kind of repetitive or really not really new to you. But this, we want to really have a player card that actually shows you the things that are unique and valuable for the player. Sorry, Kyle, take it away.
Oh, you're good. But yeah, if anyone ever wonders what the inside of my brain looks like, it's this. That this is just how I think about stats. This is how I think about, like, I interpret things visually like this. So that's why I'm always, if I think of something, I want to put it into a visual because it's a lot easier for me to share than something like trying to write it out. God help me. I had to write out my thought process behind a formula recently, and it was atrocious. I feel so sorry for anyone that had to read it. But yeah, so this is just a very grab bag mix of things that I've considered or that I've done or that I've shared or that I've looked at that are in consideration to be part of these player cards. We've got a little bit of runway, so we've got some time to put them up. We're going to have them for spring training, at the very least, maybe a beta version, and we can see how it goes and what people like and don't like. But yeah, get excited. We're going to have these holistic, like, here's who this player is style of cards. Sweet. Next slide. And then another thing I'm really excited about is hitter similarity scores. So I've been dabbling with this, next slide, that the idea of, well, we have all of these stats and especially unique PLV hitter stats that we can start to relate them and see, well, this kind of reminds me of how this guy performed, or this reminded me of how this guy performed. And so something that we're going to be incorporating and generating going into this next season is these similarity scores. So you can kind of see, well, okay, here's James Woods 2024. How did he perform in our POV metrics? Not very aggressive, especially in the zone, but made good decisions out of the zone. Decent, but not like necessarily good contact value, but he added a ton of power to it. And okay, well, who are some of the players, who does that relate to? Who are some of whose seasons does his rhyme with, basically? And 2023 Kyle Schwarber is standing out, is awesome to me if I'm looking at that. And I'm like, man, so you're telling me James Wood, who's this elite athlete, also had a season that is reminiscent of noted big boy masher Kyle Schwarber? Like, if you're telling me that you can get Kyle Schwarber but with 60 grade speed, I'm on board. Like, that's basically kind of what James Wood under the hood performed like this last year. Now, I'm not saying that he's going to hit 40 and steal 30 and all that good stuff, but it's nice to kind of have an idea, like, okay, I have an example, or now I can relate. Okay, here's how his season performed based on other seasons in the past. Who are they similar to? That I find these super fun. That it helps give you context for who a player is, and especially for rookies or maybe players that don't have quite the national spotlight, that maybe you can kind of see, like, oh, this reminds me of so-and-so. Sweet. Next slide. All right, and now my favorite part, the apps. Apps. Let's go. I have so many of these. Sweet. Next slide. So we'll start with some that are already out, and these are all going to be, again, aggregated, but swing speed analysis. This has gotten, I'm very happy with this. It's got a lot of pop this year now that we have swing speed data brought to us by StatCast, but this is my spin on it. This is me putting it into, chart form. Again, this is what my brain looks like on the inside. But you can kind of see things like, okay, well, there was a lot of talk about Anthony Volpe, and he added swing speed. And you can see on that chart on the right that he actually went from a 68, 69 mile an hour swing speed to up over 70 by the end of the season. That is a substantial increase and bodes well, at the very least, for his power potential. There's other factors that go into it, like he's also likely to whiff because there's less time for his bat to hit the ball when it's in the zone. But generally, more swing speed is better. And there's also derived or estimated stats that I provide in there. One is a very loose interpretation of what a hitter's swing acceleration is like. So that's been a very kind of interesting, eye-opening one to me, of players like Gunnar Henderson, Wyatt Langford, Elio Ramos. Like, those are guys who are at the top of the list. And that, that makes sense, that, it validates Gunnar's elite hit tool. And it also gives me promise and hope for, Elio Ramos might be a little bit undervalued right now, I think, or that it validates, Wyatt Langford's top prospect pedigree. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is one especially late in the season and into the playoffs, that I started trying to put out, but it's a app that you can make yourself. MLB win probability chart. How exciting was that game? That it's basically telling you, as the game goes on, what the win probability is. And this is all presented by StatCast by MLB. So we use their MLB win probabilities, and we turn them into these charts. So you can kind of see, like, okay, how's it going? What are teams doing? And it also puts a single number. Shout out to Sarah Langs. It's the WE index. This is just my attempt at quantifying the WE index. And yeah, that's based on, well, what was the change in win probability? How often, how much was it changing as the game went on? And then, of course, what's the biggest swing? So you can see on the chart on the left that it had a huge swing, that the Dodgers in the bottom of the ninth came back to beat the Rockies. A shocking outcome for many of you to hear, I'm sure. And then the chart on the right reflects something more along the opposite of, it's a game that swung just back and forth and back and forth. And this leaves out that this Mets Braves game was one of the not the play-in games, the extra after the season games that got the Mets into the playoffs. Yeah, I see Schwebsy in chat just loving it. Yeah, this one's for you, bud. But it's a great example of a game that just swung back and forth like a pendulum as it went on. That it was just, just two great teams just trading haymakers back and forth until the Mets finally pulled through. Next slide, please. So now we have our series simulations. This was absolutely brought in for the playoffs because you should join our PL Discord. We had a ton of conversations about what series length does, how that incorporates into results, that how often does the better team beat the underdog, how different are teams actually, like what is their true talent difference. So the big one, my favorite, is the Astros Tigers series of, well, how likely were these things to happen? And it is like, well, 10% of the time the Tigers sweep. And like, it's not a lot, but like, it happens. That it helps give some context for these things, that these series that you think are a given aren't. That even across the full 5 games, the simulation said the Astros win, less than 60% of the time. It's, and especially given that they have home field advantage, that's less than you would probably expect. But based on their performance, this is what it's like. And you can also look at teams that didn't necessarily make the playoffs just to get an idea of, well, if the Dodgers played the White Sox across however many games, what are the odds that they got the Dodgers would win the series? And the Dodgers are always the favorites to win the series, but you can see that it's almost a guarantee that if the Dodgers played the White Sox 11 times, the Dodgers are going to win the series. Even in a 1-game series, over 80% of the time they'll win. But it's the illustrative part of this was the idea of, oh, well, buys are a detriment, that's they make the teams rusty, blah, blah, blah. But listen, even if the Dodgers played the White Sox in a 3-game series, they don't advance over 10% of the time. And that's important to think about. It's important context to think about and be aware of. And these charts kind of help to illustrate that, well, do you think that being rusty is worth having a 90% chance of advancing versus a 100% chance of advancing? So there you go. That was a fun one for me, especially as the playoffs went on, to take a look. Next slide, please. So this is one, I know Nick was saying ideas are always getting thrown around at the last minute or late night. This chart popped up within the last week. I put it together, and it takes NFBC draft data and it takes it over time. It applies 14-game kind of rolling groups of it, and it takes a look and sees, like, well, what's their ADP like? What are their max picks like? And then it estimates a rough standard deviation for, well, where is that player, likely to go at a certain point in time. So you can see like how height kind of affects players. So Lawrence Butler, I know Chris Towers has been banging this drum for days now that, well, drafting him in October, you could get him for a triple digit pick, but now he's down into the low 60s. And so this kind of shows you like, oh, well, who's getting helium, and then you can determine whether you think it's valid, you think it's legit or not, or you can see how the offseason progression affects different players. So like Michael Kopech, for a long time, he's the guy in the Dodgers bullpen. That's why he was going at a sub 200 pick. But as the Dodgers continued to sign any baseball player of note, that his ADP has just really started sliding, and now he's in the mid 300s, and at the rate he's going, it's going to be even worse, especially as they've been doing a lot of bullpen signings. So it's only going to trend down, but you can kind of get an idea what it's going for. All right, next slide, please. Great. Some more kind of fantasy centric analysis. We have a hitter eligibility app, so you can quickly and easily identify based on where players played and how often they played there, what are they eligible? I know a variety of different leagues have so many different eligibility requirements. And so if your league has more granular ones, this is a good way for you to at a glance see, well, where can I slot him into my lineup, or during the season, okay, how many games does he have to reach this threshold, that threshold, the other threshold? Awesome. Next slide, please. Whew, that's it. Woo! We did it. That's what we have on the docket. That's what we're looking at for 2025. I'd like to say that these are all the things that we have plans for right now, but then it turns out you get something like Process Plus was a mid-season acquisition, a deadline acquisition. And so during the season, we'll be coming up with all sorts of new things. Like I said, I'm always in the PL Discord looking at ideas there or trying to answer questions, that those usually result in me making some sort of a chart, and then subsequently an app. Nick and I are always pinging back and forth. Our staff always coming to me with new ideas. The brilliant minds there. I like to think of myself as a conduit for allowing our staff to have the answers to the brilliant and insightful questions that they ask.
Kyle, obviously incredible stuff. And I really can't emphasize enough just how fun it is that Kyle's just like, hey, cool, look at this thing I made. And even going back to this, we didn't even hit on everything. One of the things we really want to work on as well, and Kyle's going to be working on this year, it's been kind of one of our white whales, is creating an ERA metric that is context inclusive. This is something that I think is the next step for ERA, where ERA is really just kind of taking the shallow level ERAs and saying, okay, like FIP is just strikeouts and it's walks and it's home runs allowed, right? Or essentially saying like, hey, BABIP is weird. With PLV, we can kind of say, well, he deserved to allow a hit on this one because it was a very bad pitch. And thus we can see kind of the chain of the game and say, well, yeah, he deserved this, to not do that, and then kind of create an ERA out of that, which is a little different than PLA, which is essentially saying just based on the PLVs of these pitches, we're going to have a ranking that is rooted in ERA, just kind of showcasing PLV as an ERA stat.
Yeah, and so what those do is those are basically average outcomes. So, okay, he's expected to allow a single on this pitch this often. And across all singles, this is like the general average value of singles, because it happens in, with these batters on base and these bases this percent of the time. But what this context inclusive stat will allow is it'll take your base out state into account. So something like, yeah, hitting a single is generally good, but if the bases are empty, well, the guy's just on first. It's basically the same as a walk, versus if a guy's on third, a single is substantially more valuable than a walk. And same thing too of, well, if you get a strikeout, hey, bully for you. That's awesome. Good job. If there's 0 outs, cool. Like still a strikeout, but there's still 2 more in the inning. But if there's a guy on second and third, and this is with 2 outs, that strikeout nullifies those batters on base, those base runners. And so that strikeout in how it affects your end line has much more value. And this will be, those results will be based on the PLV outcomes. So it'll be like, okay, we expect a swinging strike this percent of the time. Well, that swinging strike will end the inning. And so that swinging strike outcome gets a much higher value. And I'm excited for it. We have this deep sandbox of outcome estimates to play with. And this just allows us to, now that we've stripped context out, to get an idea of like the general, like just looking at this pitch in and of itself, how good was it? Now we can start to be like, okay, given when it was thrown in a game context, how good was it?
Yeah, and the another aspect to that too is one we actually didn't even put in here is showcasing the probabilities of PLV. That is, we have inside of it saying, great, this chance of a home run, this chance of a single or an out, and so on and so forth. And with the live pitch feed that we want to do, I'm actually just going to show this just for a moment here. This is actually something we already have for PL Pro members right now. We can go up and look at any game that Zach Wheeler has pitched, or anybody. Just go to the game date and you'll see these marks that we have, right? The individual pitch data of it and the PLV of individual pitches as it comes in, right? So we want to be able to say, look, you're watching a game. You can say he allowed a home run off of it. You can say, oh man, that was only a 1% chance of actually being a home run. Like, that is the kind of stuff that we are developing with this. And we want to get into your hands as soon as possible. So this is actually a tool that Kyle made because Eno requested it. And I've been wanting for a while, just like, you can load any game and get what we have for our PLV marks, as well as anything else that you want for one specific pitch that was thrown. It's a really amazing thing, and it's going to really kind of change how we talk about this. Also, of course, you can see just PLV per game metrics over here. And just a little bit more about the live feed here that we have as well. This is every day. We also have added now, so you have kind of relievers and not just starters, where you get just a quick look on everybody. We have our PLV stuff, our beta version here already live. And then you can actually see the entire repertoire. But what's so good about this, and that a lot of people might not know, is that we also have this for AAA data. And what I've been doing is using this with prospect pitchers, where I need to get more understanding of them at the major league level, even though they're in AAA, and the things that matter for us. So what we can do is we can load up a AAA game, and I can say, all right, I don't know who this random dude is. And I can actually see all of his pitches with PLV, their IVB, their VAA, their extension, all of that when this thing finally loads. It's because we haven't run it for a long time. But here we go. So here's like Johnny Burrito had a game. There's Mick Abel, there's Landon Knack. Oh my gosh. All of these guys. Oh, Sean Burke, my boy.
Remember some guys.
Sean Burke in this game. This was in AAA. 7 feet of extension, 17 IVB. We only like 98 stuff, which is very interesting. Maybe it's 95 velo. Maybe it's the steep attack angle for it as well. But you
Something
can
I'll talk about is different pitch types, because I'm looking at stuff across every pitch. I'm not doing it within pitch types. So like a 98 stuff plus on a fastball is really good. It's going to be better than an average fastball, because your off-speed pitches, your breaking pitches, your secondaries, like those generally get more whiffs and limit contact. So those will have higher stuff values, but like that's a good fastball still.
So this is just the kind of stuff that's just like what Kyle does is just bonkers. And I also want to really come back here for a second. Just to, we have the live draft assistant and the PL Pro dashboard. Things that we're also adding for this that we didn't even mention in this is that I do it for PL Pro members right now. I post an image that is my sit and start grade every Friday, just saying, hey, cool, these are the tiers that I have these guys. We are in the process of creating that as an app inside of the dashboard, where I actually, when I do my morning article, I put in those ranks. So every day you have an update to those ranks throughout the year. So you have my sit and start integrated into everything that we do. Our goal is to even get it to a point that you can look at your pitchers, have a widget, and then have automatically assigned my sit, start, questionable, do not start built into the dashboard. Okay, so this is the kind of stuff that we're working on to make it the easiest experience for you guys to get the best quick analysis for your teams. And also, one more is the expected starting pitching schedule. Having that as an automated table so you guys can just stay on top of all of the players and what schedules they'll have. That will also be an app inside of the dashboard and many other things as well. But Kyle, thank you so much for being a part of PitchCon and working with us for all of these things. I cannot be more excited. I mean, stud rate exists. That is a super fun one. Stud rate. Just actually mention that really quickly, Kyle, please. Sorry, as we're going a little bit over. We have Pitching Ninja, Max Greenfield, and Paul Sporer in the waiting right now. They'll be on in just a second. Kyle, please.
Yeah, so this is just looking at a way to slice and dice pitchers who have the ability to just dominate. So I mentioned it kind of when I was talking about stuff, but the ability to earn whiffs, the ability to limit contact on a per pitch level. And so stud rate is looking at kind of the results. So what's their whiff rate? What's their XWOB on contact? Are they allowing that ideal contact? And seeing like who are kind of the best guys at just completely flummoxing hitters.
It's going to be so fun. Kyle Bland, thank you so much for being here. And it's just great. It's just really great to have you on our staff and creating these great things.
Thanks, Nick. Love it. Love PitchCon. I'm excited to see the rest of the weekend. It's going to be a blast.